Can you hear me? Ah, very good. Well, thank you, Dima. I don't understand a word Russian, so the only thing I recognized was my own name and RIPE, so I don't know what you said about me. I'm going to tell you a bit about the history of RIPE from where it all started and to up till today and after my thoughts on after the IANA transition. So.
Missed the time to check your.
I've been here to check, but.
Is it going to be a lot or no?
Do you want to be here as well?
No. You're starting already?
Oh, we have started. Okay, yes. Cool. You want to join me? That's great. So, next slide, please. Yes. So, I'm Hans-Petter Holen. I've been RIPE chair for the last year or so from Norway. So that's some 40 hours driving to the west if you want to go there by car. I'm also a member of the ICANN NOMCOM last year and this year. And I've been part of the Address Council for the last 10, 15 years. And in my day job, I'm working for a Nordic company called Visma, where we're delivering hosting services and other internet services. Next slide, please. So, going back in history and looking a bit upon, next slide please, on where RIPE started. It started with a group of people who met in 1989 to solve all the problems of internet in Europe. Now that would just take a couple of meetings, and we've now had the 70 RIPE meetings, and we still think there are more issues to solve with internet. It's an open forum, open for anyone. We create policies by consensus, so there is no voting. The chair doesn't have anything to say in policy making. That's all the participants that work together to achieve consensus on what policy is going to be. And we do that in working groups. Next slide, please. So after a few years, they figured out that we can't do all this work on a voluntary basis. So then RIPE NCC, the Network Coordination Center, was formed as a secretariat for the RIPE community to make sure that we could support the meetings and make sure that we had staff to do work for us as well. So RIPE NCC is incorporated as a membership organization, and we have close to 12,000 members now, if we haven't already passed that. We also have staff both in Dubai and here in Moscow, and you probably know them both already. Next slide, please. RIPE NCC is not just a regional internet registry. I mean, we have 5 regional internet registries around the world, but RIPE NCC is special in a way that we have given them, the community have asked RIPE NCC to do a bit more than just numbers. So, in order to support the community, we have the infrastructure to meet on RIPE meetings or regional meetings like this. And we also, if you go to the next slide, do other services like the K-Route, technical training, RIPE Atlas, RIPE Stat, and support regional meetings like this. So next please. So just to give you the sort of summary of RIPE versus RIPE NCC, RIPE is the open community, the open forum. RIPE NCC is the membership association. RIPE sets the policies, RIPE NCC executes them. And in RIPE we have working group that does the work, and in RIPE NCC we have an executive board that's elected by the members. Next please. So governance and accountability is one of the words that are popping up in the discussions these days when we're talking about ICANN and IANA transition. So in RIPE, all the staff is accountable to their managers, right? So the managers tell them what to do, and if they don't do their work, they will have a serious discussion about that, and it could eventually mean that you would have to leave the company, like any of you, right? And the managing director, Axel, he reports to an executive board, so Dima sits on the executive board and makes sure that Axel does it works. So that's the accountability and governance of RIPE NCC. And the board is accountable to the members. The members elect the board once a year for a 3-year period. Now, if the members and RIPE NCC disagrees on something, we have put together an arbitration procedure so that there is a lightweight, low-cost way of resolving differences between the RIPE NCC and a member, or between two members, for instance, on who has the right to use certain address space and so on. And on the side of this, we have RIPE, which is the bottom-up, open and inclusive policy forum where we actually decide what the RIPE NCC is supposed to do. And there is a link here to an accountability matrix that's developed with all the RIRs. The other RIRs are slightly different, but have the same mechanisms. So the next one, please. So working groups I mentioned, and if you go to the next one, we have several working groups in RIPE, and it's the community that decides which working group we're going to have. And each of the working groups is managed by one or more working group chairs, co-chairs, chair, vice chair. And here you can see the picture of some of them. And if you go to the next slide again, if you go to the RIPE NCC website, you will see a section in the middle which says participate. And inside there is this link to RIPE community. And if you click on that one, you get to the pages with the working groups and so on. So you can go in, look at their pages, subscribe to their mailing lists, and take part in the community. Because the RIPE community is also all of you here. Next one, please. So basically, we are bottom-up, open and exclusive in the working groups that I think is important for you to have a look at. If you're interested in the address policy, please join the address policy working group. If you're interested in discussing and deciding what the RIPE NCC should do, then the services working group is the place to go. And even governments are welcome to RIPE meetings in all working groups. And we have a particular cooperation working group that is set up to discuss issues between governments and the community at large. So next one, please. Why am I holding this? The policy process, it's an open process where anybody can propose a policy proposal. So basically, you propose something, it's discussed on the list. If there is consensus to move ahead, then documentation is written up. The RIPE NCC does an analysis on what consequences this has on cost, procedures, and so on. Then there is a new phase of discussion. It goes into last call if there is consensus, and then the working group chairs decides if there is consensus or not, and it becomes new policy. And it's very important here, the RIPE NCC Executive Board does not decide on policy. That's decided by the community, by the consensus. Okay, next one. So I've talked about RIPE as the open community, RIPE NCC as the membership association and the RIR, the working groups, RIPE NCC accountability, and the RIPE policy development process. So if we move ahead, next slide, you all know, as Patrick talked about earlier, and as you will hear more about tomorrow, that there is a process where the US government has said that they may step out of the contract with ICANN. So if you go to the next slide and the next slide, then the whole thing here is the IANA function. So what is IANA? It's a very simple function with ICANN where they keep track on protocols for the IETF, IP addresses for the RIRs, and domain names for the, I shouldn't say domain name circus in ICANN, but that's where all the money is. So if you go to the next slide, I found two documents on the IANA website. First, on the right side, I went to their report and looked at how much work is IANA doing for the RIRs. So here you can see all the requests that they have had since September 2013, and this is basically one every second month. So to do the IANA work for the RIRs is basically responding to a request once every second month. That's not a lot of work. We have a lot of discussion for very little. If you look at the work for the IETF, the protocol parameters, there is a lot. There are lots of different protocols and lots of registrations. And if you look at the red bars here on domain names, you can clearly see here when we had the new GTLDs, there is a lot more work for IANA there. So basically, the workload on IANA is much higher on protocols and on domain names, which is an interesting thing to bear in mind in the discussions we're in. Next one. So I'll skip this timeline. IANA acts according to global policies, and we today have 3 global policies, one for V6 addresses, one for AS numbers and one for V4 addresses. So this is when an RIR runs out of V6 addresses. This policy states what IANA is going to do when the RIR asks for more addresses. Really simple. There is also a fourth document that's been developed by the RIRs, and the Address Council oversaw that, and that's the criteria for establishing new regional internet registries, which happened with Afrinic and with LACNIC. But that's not really a global addressing policy. Next one, brilliant, you're getting the hang of it now. The global policy process is really very simple. I outlined the policy process in the RIPE region. So there are similar policy process in the other regions. So basically, you make a global proposal, and you run it through the policy proposal in all the 5 regions. And when it comes out, hopefully as the same proposal in all regions, then the Address Supporting Organizations Address Council, which is members from all the open policy forums in all the regions, looks at it to see that the process has been followed, then passes it on to the ICANN board, who can only approve it. They can also send it back, but then they can only do that a couple of times, and then it becomes policy. So basically, policy is set by the communities. So if you go to the next one, we can skip this one, and I can say a bit about what we have been doing in order to move ahead with a proposal for what we want to do in our region. Is that we put together a team. So if you look back in history, since '89, we're actually working to establish a way of working between the RIRs and with IANA. So what we really want, if the US government is to step out, is to keep as much as possible as the way it was, because this is working. So we formed a team with volunteers. I called for volunteers at the RIPE meeting in RIPE 69. Nurani and Andre volunteered, and then the RIPE NCC volunteered Paul Rendek to work on this. And you can actually move on to the next one. And this received support from the closing plenary, and has been on the CRISP team that's been working with combining the input from all the regions into a joint proposal. And of course, in our region, Chris and Athena has been doing a tremendous work to support this team and writing up documents and so on. So these are the people that has been putting on paper the proposal from the RIPE region on what things should be after the transition. So if you go to the next one, what's going to happen next, and we're going to hear much more about that tomorrow, is that this proposal will be passed on. So if you go to the next slide, you will see here that we have passed on our proposal to the ICG, which is the common group that will gather all the proposals, but we're still waiting for the names side. And that's going to be the very interesting thing to see here, because we are approaching the deadline. As there was a question about here earlier on, what should we do when we hit that deadline? Yeah, well, that's a very good question for the community. Where do we want to end up? And if you then go to the next slide, there are some key principles here, and I think you can go to the one after here. And the next one, I think, yeah, the essence of the proposal that's on the table is actually that the oversight that the US government is doing today will be replaced by a contract with the RIRs. So what we want to do is that the IANA is doing a job for the numbering community, and the RIRs will hold that contract. So it's not that ICANN decides what we're going to do, it's that we will decide what IANA is going to do. And what we want to have in that proposal is that the communities, the numbering communities, should have the power to change the IANA operator if it doesn't perform, just like the US government has today. And if you then take the next one, there is a lot of details here about the components in the proposal, which we will hear more about tomorrow, so you can go on to the next one. There is now also an SLA on the table with a lot of principles that comes from this, so I won't do a spoiler here, but you can read up on this afterwards. And there has been proposal to put together a review committee, because if the RIRs want to change the IANA operator in the future, we, the community, should have a say as well, so we want to have some community members involved in this too. And then if you go to the next slide, there is also some concern about who owns the trademarks and so on. We, the community, wants to own that. And then if you go to the next slide, this is kind of the end situation that I see that we should end up in. So we, the numbering community, we have formed RIRs, such as the RIPE NCC, that acts on our behalf. So we control what our RIPE NCC does through open policy processes. Then we make global policy, as I described to you. And then that global policy directs IANA into what they are going to do. So we have the policy side, which is regulated today in an MOU with ICANN. And what we're missing now is on the right-hand side, the operational thing, the service level agreement on how IANA is going to act when there are requests from the RIRs. So it's kind of a really simple model. There is no big changes in how we operate. We have the policy processes already. That's the most important one. The community decides on the policies. And then the simple part is actually what all this discussion is about. Who is going to oversee IANA? Well, we are going to oversee IANA. That's how I interpret the community. That the IANA is doing work for the RIRs to coordinate the address space between them, and the community will oversee that. So in a true bottom-up manner. So basically, that was what I had prepared. So I don't know if there are any questions, or I'm sure Dima has something to ask. You usually have.
Dear colleagues, so you are not interested in anything we're discussing, IANA position, whatever. Everything is clear for me. Yes, Hans make me calm for the nearest 2 weeks, but just for 2 weeks. I'm very grateful to him, and I propose to ask questions.
So now I can understand you.
Oh. I will repeat. You called me for the next 2 weeks. You called me for the next 2 weeks to the next ICANN meeting, but I don't know how are the things turning next in 2 weeks. What can you say? What are we to expect this month concerning IANA transition?
I think we can expect that we will finalize the SLA. So basically, we have a proposal on the table, and we have an SLA, which is in much the same way as the ITF. So I think the big question is what happens on the names side. And since I'm not doing names, I don't really know. If I'm going to guess, based on previous track record, the names will not be ready on time. Hopefully I will be positively surprised, but I don't know.
I have a question. What will names address community do if something goes wrong? If something breaks by September, and if the strong lobby will counteract, what would you do if everything goes in the wrong direction?
What is the wrong direction? If the proposal is not in place in time, the US government can extend the contract for up to 2 years. So there is a point in time now when the contract can end and be replaced with something else, but it can go on for another 2 years. So that's the simple answer. The complicated answer is that there is something called politics in the US. So there is an election coming up this autumn.
Can I give some details?
Oh, yeah.
I will just explain, because in the principle, a lot is strict. got carte blanche from the Senate. After hearings in Senate, this circus happens once in 2 months. And the question was, how much do you need to expand? The proposals was 3 months, 6 months, 2 months, and even with the current Senate, we expect the announcement of the prolongation of the contract. This can happen in the end of June, 26th June, I think. The question is different. They are having the presidential race, and they're running for presidency, and all means are good, and they will use all legislation acts which and on one of the hearings in the Senate, one of the congressmen from Texas said, guys, we have not withdrawn our occupational troops, neither from Germany, and why should we withdraw them from internet? This is our territory. This is our way of thinking, and it doesn't depend whether we look at the Hawks or whether the name is Congress or Duma. There are such people everywhere. Yes, these are the risks that exist. The other question that we are evading, and which I asked to Patrick, do we need to have just one IANA? Initially, I proposed in open discussions of the contract with NTIA that these functions can be divided easily. For many years, ITF was reluctant to this position. It was a recommendation that everything should be in one hands, but as you can see, in reality, this is the position of the SAC expressed by Patrick, and if you read the documents, you will see that this does not bring any hazard to stability. This is not dangerous for stability. The division, as it goes further, whether these proposals on division will be accepted, they give us the possibility to act independently. Moreover, the lists of discussions are open. Anyone can take part in those discussions concerning IANA transfer, because these are open lists which we're discussing. The Windsor asked, it was a rhetorical question, because as a joint administration of all structures, we have been discussing this question, whether we can fulfill functions of IANA. Yes, we can, but very small additional mechanisms. The rest is political risks. Now we are entering the period of big politics, and neither me, neither Hans can be responsible for that.
And I think all the politics is not really in the IP addresses. I see Axel wants to say something here.
Thank you. And there are, of course, different options still, apart from the politics. We are looking at the IANA contract, as you've said. It is bound to expire in September and might be prolonged for a longer period or shorter period. Of course, it's also a possibility that it will be changed, and that those parts of the community that have gotten their proposals done and in an acceptable form to the powers that be, it's possible that those communities might be let go a little bit earlier. So there have been discussions, not to say expectations, discussions that it would be possible that the IANA contract by NTIA would be prolonged only for the names part, because the ITF is simple, the numbers are simple. We don't know what is going to happen. And if it were not to be dropped in the end, operationally, we are happy with IANA. We are happy with IANA for 15 years, more or less. So operationally, this doesn't mean anything. It is of quite some significance in the political field. And Dima might have to allow me some more funds to bolster our external relations team to talk to the governments of the world some more, if that doesn't happen. Thank you.
And I think to add to Axel's point here, the workload that I described for the IANA function for numbers, one request every second month, that hardly requires one full-time employee. But all the politics around here requires a lot. So you had another questions up there?
Russian. Dmitry asked my question, answered my question when he said that he is ready to fulfill the IANA functions. I don't know who is ready to do that, but somebody is ready to fulfill IANA functions. From bureaucratic point of view, these structures, NRO, ASO, are they ready to get formalized? And the question of budget. Now, the main economic driver of IANA and ICON, well, the cost is less than 1/2 of person of these functions. You can look at the you can even 20% of a man you can see on the inquiries. I would like to add that the whole staff of IANA is 10 people plus director, Tim Davis. It's just one person. The whole of IANA has 12 people in staff, but now currently there are 11 people working, including vice president and CEO. In fact, it is one person, one dubbing. It is clear. It is fulfillment of IT inquiries, documentation, part-time work, and the rest are working along the GTND program. It's just replacement, and 2 technicians for signing the routes. Those are people with whom I work. 3 people, including Kim Davis, who are doing the key route signing. For example, there are officers who sign the route. So it's not fantastic activity which can be done by many operators, and currently it's just a mechanical, bureaucratic activity. Well, do I understand this right? So if any of REERs will allocate 1 person, it will be more than enough. Well, we should add some kind of a policy which calls under accountability for supervising, but it exists already. The question whether we should incorporate NRO for that, I don't know, because I would like to remind that establishment of NRO was caused by functions of IANA. We just didn't do that. But if they say that we need some legal entity, I think that someone was interested in that. From the point of view of need, I think that this could be dissolved quite quickly. Currently, we can do without any jurisdiction, joint operation of 5 registries. Well, question of jurisdiction is very important everywhere, and the question of risks. Why didn't we do that earlier? Because we cannot put it to the risk of political attacks when it is artificially concentrated problem that IP addresses are some critical super resource. Many thought, just understand, the law enforcement or the same Germany thought that they will be able to identify every person using IP addresses, and this illusion vanished just 3 years ago. FBI pays more money.